Well, after more than 80 years, a little creature is coming home. Eastern Bettongs are rare native Australian mammals, nocturnal, rabbit-sized kangaroos. They're virtually extinct on the mainland, but have thrived in Tasmania, where they've been safe from predators. This week, in a combined effort by the Tasmanian and ACT governments, the CSIRO and the ANU, Bettongs have been arriving in Canberra by plane from Tasmania to set up their new homes at Mulligan's Flat. Adam Shirley reports.
Possibly that. Oh, this is north to the top, yes. So 2 there and 2 there. This is an ideal animal to take. It's a bonus that we know she's breeding because she's got the pouch young, and eventually when that young emerges, that'll be an additional animal to the colony, so it'll grow a bit faster as a result of animals like this.
This delicate little creature represents a big ambition for scientists. On a cold Sunday night this week, about 10 kilometres out of Hobart, a number of eastern bettongs were collected for a special interstate journey. Tasmania is the only place where these secretive cousins of kangaroos live in the wild.
They're quite common through a lot of the grassy woodland areas, the dry areas. Even in some plantations, they're, particularly eucalypt plantations of a certain age, they're quite common, but they're very timid, very nocturnal, but oddly feisty when you're handling them. In fact, they're one of the hardest native animals to handle because they're very feisty, very highly strung, and that's why we take so much care with them.
Oh yes, very good.
Also known as rat kangaroos, eastern bettongs used to be common across southeast Australia, but not a single one was left on the mainland by the 1920s, mostly due to an onslaught of feral foxes and cats.
But also habitat change and direct persecution by humans. So there was 3 million bounties were paid on rat kangaroos in New South Wales. So it gives you an idea of the sort of pressure that was on them.
Adrian Manning is leading a mob of researchers from the ANU, the CSIRO and the ACT and Tasmanian governments. They are aiming to reintroduce these little critters to their former home.
Bettongs are what we call ecosystem engineers, and that is an animal that changes an ecosystem in ways that benefit lots of other species. And the way it does that is by disturbing the soil and digging for fungi, its main food source. And if they're turning over soil, that's a great place for germination of plants. They also, in eating fungi, the spores, these fungi have symbiotic relationship with trees, so they allow them to take up nutrients in a better way. So they're part of the way the fabric of the system. When we remove an animal like that, things start to unravel.
A handful of eastern bettongs were flown to a captive environment at Tidbinbilla Reserve late last year to see if they would survive the journey. This week, about 20 have made the trip from the Apple Isle to be released into Mulligan's Flat, the first time they've hopped around a big mainland forest for 90-odd years.
It's a unique place because it's 450 hectares right on the edge of Canberra, so there are very few places like this. People think it's just paddocks, but it's critically endangered. It was nearly all cleared for farming, and these guys are bringing it back to somewhat like it was like when Europeans arrived here. Well, these bettongs and all the other animals are not just nice things in a treed environment. They're part of the whole ecosystem and they drive it. So they're eating these truffles away, digging 3,000 hole dig-ins per hectare, which is quite extraordinary.
Years of planning have gone into collection, transport, vet checks and other parts of the process to ensure the bettongs have the best chance of survival.
Well, it's a big task, and you've got to be ready to adapt because anything could happen. So there's a lot of communication between the different parts. So we know every day how many have arrived, what the sex is, have they got pouch young, and that sort of things.
The project is part of a bigger experiment at Mulligan's Flat into certain types of Australian forests and the effects native animals have on them.
Once we understand that, so we understand how to bring them back and we understand the effects, we can then apply that in other places where woodlands need to be restored. Often we think about, when we look at a nature reserve, it's a place to keep animals, for example, but actually what we're saying is what is the role of an animal in creating and improving the nature reserve. You know, it almost makes its own environment and the environment for lots of other animals.
If the Bettongs prosper at Mulligan's Flat, the research team hopes the animals can spread further. At this stage, it's one tentative hop at a time.
So we'll never get back to where we were, but I tend to be optimistic that these Bettongs will hopefully thrive in this environment, and then, you know, we're talking about how do we release them into the greater environment and restore woodlands without the use of a lot of steel and fences that obviously interfere with other ecological processes. This has been surviving on, you know, 2 and 3 year grants from funding bodies that will run out when the experiments run out, and we need to keep this going. People from all around the world are watching this experiment. It's well known already, and I think it'll become, you know, one of the great, you know, well known ecological experiments of the age.
Well, that was pretty good, wasn't it?
David.
Well done, David.
It didn't bolt at all.
Probably the nicest release
Well
so far.
done.
I hope we see that again sometime. And thanks to our colleagues in Tasmania for their end of that story.